Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith, and you're most welcome to another episode of Book Lovers Companion without the chattering teacup, but with a wonderful guest from across the pond. Let's bring him in. Hello and welcome, Omari Richards, on the show. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Wonderful, and thank you for making time for us. And let's dive right in, shall we? You are an author of a starting series, I gathered, called the Kimono Legacy Initiation.
Yes, that is correct.
It came out last year in June?
Yes, June 14th, 2023. So it's approaching its first year of being published, which is crazy.
Yeah. Congratulations on that account. And let's dive right in, shall we? What can you tell our listeners about your book?
Well, The Kimono Legacy is a debut epic fantasy novel that focuses on three siblings of noble heritage, Kamau, Rizia, and Maslow Kimono. They are part of the titular Kimono clan, and each of them are on a journey towards adulthood and figuring out what adulthood means within their culture, their clan, and their land of Nawala. But while they go on that journey of self-discovery and coming of age, they discover a major conspiracy against their clan. So the three of them branch off to figure out how to stop all three sides of the conspiracy. And then along the way, they run into a lot of magic, monsters, traitors, demons, and worse.
There's a lot in there, isn't it?
Quite a bit.
And it's a rather lengthy start for a debut novel.
Yes, it's about 740 pages. I don't even know what that word count is.
Incredible. And is it meant as a young adult fiction?
It can be, but it's mostly for the new adult to adult demographic. I'm sure young adults can enjoy it, but there are several subtext and references that I think more new adults and adults would understand. But there's still plenty for young adult readers to enjoy, as long as they don't mind some gore and some swearing.
Oh yeah, it starts off quite gory. Let's be honest here a little bit. And it also starts off with a element which is magical, mystic.
Yes.
What can you tell us about this part of the book?
Well, the magic system is based primarily on West African mythology and folk tales, and within West African West African cultures. At least from what I've researched in preparation for the book, magic lives alongside of everyday life. It's not anything separate. It's not something you're particularly born with. Anyone can call upon the ancestors. Anyone can be possessed by an ancestral spirit if they take the time to actually summon and nurture that spirit. And possession is seen as a good thing because it indicates a strong connection to the ancestors. And throughout West African folklore and mythology, you run into people who just unknowingly access magic or deliberately accesses magic through chants or potions or just interactions with an elder. Or just interactions with an animal like Anansi the spider. So this magic system in the book, it's pretty, I don't want to say it's like intricate. It's basically more connected to the ancestors, connected to the land, connected to various bonds that people make with nature, spirits, or even within themselves. So in the first chapter, one of the main characters, Kamau, he unknowingly taps into an aspect of magic that he wasn't aware that he had. So a good portion of his character journey is figuring out, okay, where does this connection come from? Who am I connected to? How did I become connected? How can I use it to help me? And why is this magic suddenly forbidden to me? Because even though magic is generally accepted as a thing and generally accepted as people can access
Mm-hmm.
it within the world of the story, only some people, only some trained people can access it. So Kamau has to figure out, okay, why is this so forbidden? What's so dangerous about it? So he has to learn firsthand just what the dangers are with magic and what he can do with it, what he can't do with it, what he should do with it, what he shouldn't do with it. And that's just
Mm-hmm.
like a brief little tease of what to expect with Kamau there.
Mm. And would you say that the siblings are they representative of different parts of their community? Because I got the impression that, like you said, it's a coming of age for all three of
Yes.
them. Kamau, he's more like the one who is struggling with his place or who he is. Then we have his
Right.
sister. She strikes me as the nerdy one. And we have the brother who is the warrior type.
Yes. Yes, they all represent different aspects of their community, which you hinted on. Kamau is, the young man on the cusp of adulthood, but he's still trying to figure out what adulthood actually means and what's really expected of
Mm-hmm.
adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
and if his vision of adulthood matches the reality of adulthood. And Rizia is pretty much a young girl who is, who would very much like to be a student, but her society is pushing her
Mm.
into adult roles before she really understands what it even is or what's, what to expect. Like she's 13, but she's expected to be a bride all of a sudden. And, and she has to reconcile the fact that she is really smart, she is really talented, and she has a drive to be a scholar. But she realizes that within this society, that's not as valued as she thought it was. So she has to figure out, okay, where exactly can I fit in the way I am? And then Maslow was someone who supposedly found his place, but then he sees that in order to stay there and remain there, he has to make a lot of sacrifices. And he has to ask himself, are these sacrifices that I'm making, are they still worth it for
Mm-hmm.
this place that is causing me a whole lot of pain? So that is pretty much where each of them are. And I would like to think one or hopefully all three characters, connects with various readers in different parts of their life.
No, as a woman, probably the nerdy sister connects especially with me. But it is set in West Africa, like you said, and you're also a big fan of fantasy. So for me, as an uneducated reader in this regard, knowing nothing about culture in Western Africa, how much did you take from this background, this West African background, and how much is your own invention or steeped in fantasy?
I would say like a good portion of it is West African based, particularly the ethnic group of the Mandinka, the Igbo, the
Mm-hmm.
Yoruba, the Dogon, and some aspects of the Zulu and the Hossa
Mm-hmm.
people. Even though the Zulu is a South African
Mm-hmm.
ethnic group,
Mm-hmm.
I still pulled a little bit here and there
Mm-hmm.
from them. And then I just really looked into their folk tales, their legends, their history, how they viewed the world, their philosophies, and then I just kind of extrapolated from there in order to create the world. So, for example, I took the story of Sunjata, the founder of the Mali Empire, and then I looked into his history, and then I just kind of I enjoyed it. It's a fantastic story for anyone who wants to get into West African
Mm-hmm.
mythology and history. I
Mm-hmm.
would highly recommend you start there with the Epic of Tunjata.
Mm-hmm.
But I just sort of took the main story beats of the Sunjata story and just kind of I don't want to say twisted them, but I adapted them to the world that I was trying to make. if you read the Sunjata story and read the Kimoni legacy, you'll find some similarities between Maslow and Sunjata, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then for Rizia, I studied Nana Asma'u, who was a renowned scholar within the Sotoko Caliphate
Mm-hmm.
in northern Nigeria. She was a renowned scholar. She was the daughter of the Caliph, Usman Danfodio, and she got married when she was like 12 or 13, and she became a renowned scholar, a poet. She observed several battles. She was a strong advocate of women and girls education within her community. And I think she became a traveling teacher. And to this day, she's still highly renowned within the northern Nigeria area. So you can obviously see parallels between her story and Rizia's story. And then Kamal mostly comes from my own experiences. As a millennial, after I graduated college, I realized that a lot of the things that we were promised in adulthood wasn't occurring with my generation. We were told go to college, get if you go to college, you get a good job. If you get a good job, you'll get a good house. And then when you have a good house, you can afford to send your kids to college and you'll stay at whatever company took you for like 30, 40 years, and then you'll get a pension, you'll retire, and then you'll live an easy life in the middle class. And by the time we got out of college, we all realized none of that was happening. So I took that major disconnect that I was feeling and put it in Kamal because he has to face a rite of passage, but then he fails that rite of passage. So now it's in this weird limbo of, okay, you're not quite a boy, but you're not a man to this culture. So he has that feeling of, okay, so what do I do now? What am I? What can I do? So Kamal mostly came from my own experiences and experiences that I was observing within my generation and the generation after us. So I think it was a good mix of West African mythology and folklore and history and my own experiences and everything that I was observing.
Also a little bit of underlying sibling rivalry because of his brother, his successful brother?
I mean, a bit. There's certainly envy there, but I wouldn't call it rivalry because I initially thought about the sibling rivalry angle, but then I thought, I've seen so many royal stories where the siblings are at each other's throats, and that's so predictable. What if these siblings actually liked each other, but there's still that hint of envy within each of them regarding the other ones? And that to me created a more complex and dynamic relationship that was more fun to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like you said, it is not predictable then in that way. Because we get it all the time, this rivalry, and like you said, being at each other's throats when they should work together. Envy is good, but the underlying love for each other is even more interesting, I suppose. It's a little bit like when you read crime fiction, when you have this washed out detective who is divorced and who has a problem with whiskey and so on. Oh, not again, please.
Exactly.
It's so overdone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You told us a lot about your characters and their background now, about their culture, where they live in, and a teeny tiny bit of the characters themselves. Which one of the characters was the biggest challenge for you to write?
Oh, Rizia, without a doubt. Because she is the direct opposite of everything that I am and everything that I like to read. So I usually like to read and write action scenes. I like to read and write magical scenes. I love political intrigue. I love epic quests, epic journeys. I love larger than life characters. And you see a lot of that within Maslow and Kamal.
Rizia, she was the hardest for you because she's so different from yourself, and also because she's female?
Yes, there's always that aspect of, you have that whole men writing women thing on the internet where male writers try to write female characters and it's always hilariously off base or disturbingly off base. So I really want to, just try to make her an interesting character. And I just wanted to make it so that anyone could really put themselves in her shoes. And I just basically led with empathy.
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking of, hey, would I feel in that situation? And then
Mm-hmm.
I just, modeled some of her behavior off of the women in my life, my mother, my sister, my various aunts, my various cousins, friends of the opposite sex that I had, acquaintances had. So I just pulled from every source that I could think of. And, for the most part, she was just still the most challenging one because when she got into trouble, when she
Mm-hmm.
faces adversity, unlike
Mm-hmm.
Kamau or Maslow, with whom they can just fight or magic their way out of the situation, she doesn't have either option. So for Rizia, I had to think of ways for her to think, strategize, and pretty much outsmart the situation,
Mm-hmm.
which always stretched my creativity and always stretched my way of thinking. Um, in one particular scene, she's facing down a guy with a machete who
Mm-hmm.
is bent on
Yep.
taking her out. So in that scene, she's by herself. She has no weapon. She has no bodyguard. So she has to reason her way out of that situation. And for me, that was really, really difficult because I was like, she doesn't have a sword. She doesn't have magic. What am I supposed to do here? So, it was a good challenge. Like I said, it really expanded my way of thinking
Mm-hmm.
to be my most challenging character because her challenges are just going to keep increasing. So I have to come up with more and more clever ways to get her out of it.
And since we said at the beginning that it is an incredible long first book in a series, I get it. Yeah. Um,
Yeah.
what about your
Yes, the series.
what about your writing process? I mean, writing this amount of words. How are you a planner? Are you a pantser? Can you be a pantser when you write this epic and even plan on a series?
I'm mostly a planner because with a book this big and with the world this intricate, you really can't. Well, I shouldn't say can't. I would not recommend pantsing because you never know what reference you make on page 10 suddenly becomes important on
Yeah.
page 200.
Yeah. Planning is important. I get that when you plan this epic and you have to remember what you did on page 200 and don't get it wrong on page, like I said, 500. And do you work with spreadsheets? Spreadsheets, do you use them or any kind of, I don't know, board in your office where you have all the characters and what's going on and the plots and so on?
I should, but I don't. I don't like spreadsheets that often.
So you
Yeah.
said you're not the spreadsheet kind of type, but how do you do it?
A lot of outlining on Microsoft Word, a lot of free writing, a lot of my notes in my on my laptop and on my various other computers and devices. It's basically the titles are who is this character
Mm.
or who is Sewell, who is Abasi, who is Mariama, and then I just have a whole character sheet of their clan, their age, major events in their life, who they are affiliated with, what they do in the plot, how they might affect book two, their connections with Kamau, Rizzi, and
Mhm.
Maslow, and
Mhm.
so on and so forth. So I just kind of refer to that. And for me, it's just more freeing that way because with spreadsheets, it's very locked in.
Mm.
But I feel like when I have a new idea for a character that doesn't suit what I previously planned,
Mhm.
I can just open up a new Microsoft Word document and just rejigger it and um, rework it without feeling like I have to follow what's in the spreadsheet.
Mhm.
Does it sound very disorganized? Yes, because it is.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah, but it works for you.
yeah, it allows me the ability to just improvise, like I
Mm,
said, because even though I do lay a lot of the groundwork, once I have that groundwork established,
mhm,
I pretty much let the characters lead the story.
mhm,
So it's pretty much me setting ground rules
mhm,
where I basically say to the characters, okay, you can't go past this point,
mhm.
and you can't go this far up, but
Okay.
other than that, you can do whatever, and they always lead me to very interesting places.
Mm,
Um, for example, the book was originally just supposed to be about Kamau and
mhm,
Kamau only.
mhm.
Maslow was going to be dead, and
Mm,
before the story even started, and Rizia was just supposed to be mentioned in passing as he
mhm,
goes along in his journey. But then, as I was writing Kamau's chapters, it's like something. It always felt like something was missing.
mhm.
It always felt like he was just out there by himself, like he was the only person that occupied this world. He was the only person that was important within the clan.
Mhm,
And then that's really not how, at least, African families function. They're always this really big family unit
mhm,
with extended families, uncles, cousins,
mhm,
brothers, sisters, family friends, the children of family friends, lifelong friends, etc. So for Kamau just to be a one man show, it didn't feel right.
yeah.
So I started thinking, okay, well, what's the story about his brother? What's the story about his sister? And then the more Kamau interacted with them, the more I started to realize, okay, he needs his siblings around. He needs to have a close relationship with them. He needs these other characters to just bounce off of and just to react to, in order to really strengthen who he is as a character and to strengthen them as characters. So that's kind of what I mean by like laying the groundwork, but letting the characters lead the way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And was it really planned as a series right from the start, or did it develop in this way?
It was always going to be a series.
Mhm,
It wasn't meant to be as long as the first book. But once I added in Rizia and Maslow, it really necessitated it,
mhm.
because I couldn't have these two other characters
Yeah,
and just not use them. And then I thought, oh, this is a great way to showcase this viewpoint of the world. Like
yeah,
Maslow showcases the warrior point of view of Noala. Rizia showcases, the young girl perspective of
yeah,
Noala,
yeah.
and both of those are very different perspectives that Kamau doesn't provide on his own. So it really served the sword to just dive more in depth of those different perspectives
Mhm,
and just really lay into what makes them different, how are they similar, how do they interact. And honestly, the more I researched about West African history, mythology,
mhm,
and folklore,
mhm.
the more ideas I found, and the more it was just so interesting. I couldn't help but just find ways to just add in all of the new stuff that I was finding into the story. And it just ballooned into about 740 pages. So rather than just trying to chop it up and edit, I was like, okay, it's that long. The characters want to be that long, so that's how long it is. That's
Yeah,
how long it's going to be.
yeah, absolutely fine. And research.
Mhm.
How long did it take you to research? And where when was the point for you where you said, "Okay, I've done my research. Let's get to the writing part." And how much of a research was necessary during the writing, if at all?
Oh yeah, no, there was so much research needed, because the funny thing about writing just about anything regarding West Africa, or just the continent of Africa in general, it's just so easy to get it completely wrong.
Mm,
There have just been so many depictions of West Africa and African peoples of various ethnic groups.
mhm,
There's just been so many depictions that have just been so totally off base, so problematic and just so harmful. I didn't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to be as thorough as I could. I wanted to give every person, every character, every setting, every clan as much depth, complexity, and personhood that I could provide as an author. So that required just really diving in and just, absorbing everything West African related that I could find. Now, that just the region of West Africa is very huge. There's so many ethnic groups within that region alone. So I had to zero in on, okay, who is my main baseline of reference? And I landed on the Mandinka people of Mali and parts of Gambia and so on. So then I had to look into, like I said, their history, their culture, their folklore, their idioms. Idioms are actually are a really good way of figuring out how a culture sees situations, how they process informations.
Yeah.
One of my favorite idioms I found was "an empty stomach has no ears," which basically means you can't take in information if you're hungry. So it was researching those idioms and that kind of elder knowledge that really guided my hand in research. But it still took quite a long time. I started writing. I got the idea to write the book when I was 15 years old. I am 33 now, so it took about 15, 16, 17 years of research, writing, and rewriting, mostly because I just kept, within those years, I just kept learning more and more and more about the region of West Africa. And the more I learned, the more I went back to my story and changed things and made, because what I was writing wasn't matching what I was researching. For example, like one of my starting points was asking myself just how many West African kings I could name. And I could only name two when I started, Mansa Musa and Shaka Zulu. And like I said before, Shaka Zulu was in South Africa, not West Africa. So already I was like, okay, I really need to just dive right into who these kings are, what they did, why they did it, and so on and so forth. But I think the point where I realized I had researched enough was when, as I was writing, I stopped referring to my research material and just started referring to my my developing lore. So when I was planning out major war events and the fallout of that war, I was looking into, okay, who were the clan members? Who were their leaders? What were they after? Did they get it? If they didn't get it, what happened? And then once I realized that I was referring more to my character sheets and my lore Bible, that was the point where I realized, okay, I think I can go ahead and actually legitimately start writing. But there are still many scenes where I have to go back to research and my research book just to make sure I did it right, like market scenes. Like, I want to make sure like what they're selling is what it sense for the climate and what's around them. So it's a very push and pull process.
And how hard was it for you to I don't know how to put it, how to filter out what to put in and what to leave out from your research? Because usually it's this question with historic fiction authors. They say, oh, I've done all this research, and the question is, how much shall I put in without annoying the reader or making it boring?
Well, I think of it one of two ways. The first way is what serves the story best. So if there's one fact or if there's one aspect that either contradicts something that I put in before or doesn't really fit the character of that particular clan I'm talking about, I disregard it. And plus, I'm in fantasy, not historical fiction. So I feel like I have more creative leeway than the historical fiction author. who, even though it's fiction, it still has to confide with historical fact in shape or form.
Mm-hmm.
With fantasy, history and mythology are jumping off points,
Mm-hmm.
and then once you jump off, you can start creating and shaping it to make the story your own.
Yeah.
But the second way I approach it is, if something matters to the character, you have to make it matter to the reader.
Mm-hmm.
We can, if the characters really, really care about it, the writer or the author has to figure out a way to make it matter to the reader.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I watched this show, Better Call Saul, which is basically about lawyers.
Yeah.
And my older brother's a lawyer, and he tells me all the time, like, law isn't very interesting. It's just a lot of boardrooms, it's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of handshaking, it's a lot of minute details that the layman just does not care about. But in the show Better Call Saul, the creators really make us care about these minute details, because the overall theme of the show is about how this guy, Jimmy McGill, who started off as a fairly average, somewhat upstanding person, became this really sleazy, amoral lawyer who is in bed with several cartel drug members. So his journey to that point is the main crux of the show. So all of the legal stuff that happens is important because it's showcasing each step in his journey to become that person.
Mm-hmm.
So when he forges documents, that that scene that is framed as a major stepping point, because it's displaying his corruption further.
Mm-hmm.
When he switches addresses, like when he goes into high stake boardroom meetings, like the show really goes out of its way to frame it as much tension as possible to make the character care about what's going on. So I take that to heart when I am writing or deciding what to add and what not to add, because it's important for the character. Like Masamo's a warrior, so he would care about if his armor is clean, how he presents himself, the make of his sword, his horse. Those are all minute details that the layman might not care about, but for Maslow, it's important because all this stuff keeps him alive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I have to write it in such a way where the reader can feel that same tension that he feels as he's doing these things.
And the fantasy aspect of your book, is it the bigger or the greater freedom you have that draws you to fantasy?
Oh, yes, definitely. I like to say that the best part about fantasy is there are always dragons, basically. So fantasy always gives you that sense of, freedom where anything can happen. You can have dragons in the air, you can have portal jumping, you can have underwater creatures, you can have magical people who can pull the moon down from the sky or whatever. As long as it makes sense within the world, as established, pretty much anything can happen, and that's the fun part of the genre.
Yeah, absolutely understandable. And do you have a role model as a fantasy writer in this regard?
I think all fantasy writers look up to J.R.R. Tolkien, obviously, because he basically created the genre as we know it, and George R.R. Martin is getting up there. Robert Jordan with his Wheel of Time, Brandon Sanderson, Neil Gaiman, obviously, Terry Pratchett, all those greats. They're obviously part of my repertoire, but on a more personal note, I really look up to N.K. Jemisin. She is an African-American sci-fi author, sci-fi fantasy. She wrote the Broken Earth trilogy, which is really good. Octavia Butler.
Mm.
She is fantastic
Mm.
in the in the sci-fi genre. Like, I have not met a sci-fi fan who hasn't read at least one of her books or all of her books. I personally looked up to Charles N. Saunders, who is a lesser known Black American fantasy author who wrote the Imaro series, which
Mm-hmm.
is more of a Conan Barbarian meets African mythology
Okay.
kind of story. And it's awesome. It's filled with so much action, so many
Mm-hmm.
different monsters. And Amaro is a fantastic character. I also really admire Milton J. Davis. He is a Black American author based out of Atlanta, Georgia. He also writes Black fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
He writes more short form books.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorites is Amber and the Hidden City. It's
Mm-hmm.
about a girl from Atlanta, Georgia, who
Mm-hmm.
discovers she's like a lost princess in this lost city
Mm-hmm.
in West Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really fun. Yeah, and I would list more, but we'd be here all day.
You're absolutely a fantasy nerd in this regard. That's wonderful. And there's also the question as a writer. It has come up in various conversations I had before. The question these days of being a creative writer and artificial intelligence.
Oh,
What are your thoughts on this?
well, I feel like on its own, AI could be a helpful tool. It can help you write synopsis
Mm-hmm.
for your book. It can help you write those query letters that a lot of authors have a great deal of anxiety about. Even
Yeah.
help you write your resume when you're presenting it to people.
Yeah.
So it can help you do a lot of the form of writing that a lot of people just don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of creative writing, that's kind of where it gets really tricky
Mm.
because um I wrote just as like an experiment. I put into it, give me a story about a knight, an ogre, and a princess, and it gave me a fairly rough outline of the story. I still had to write it, obviously. um but it can help you get your it can help you like get your ideas down and make you realize what you want out of the story and what you don't want out of the story.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, the way the corporations are using AI is really troubling because they know AI is scraping from established, published, and copyrighted works,
Yeah.
and they know it is actively pulling from those sources and mixing them together to create something different.
Yeah.
But they're not acknowledging or compensating the
Mm.
original sources, which I think is one of the main problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the other problem is their companies are using AI as an excuse to cut out artists from the process.
Yeah.
I saw an artist I follow on social media. I think he said it best. He said, AI in itself is a tool,
Yeah.
like a hammer.
Yeah.
But wouldn't you want to give the hammer to the carpenter who has been working with hammers all of his life and would know how to incorporate it into his work, as opposed to the executive who has never held a hammer in his life, but now thinks he has this shiny hammer he can build a house all by himself.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that to me is the main issue. If they just compensated the artists that
Mm-hmm.
the AI was learning from, and if AI produced a kind of report or a works cited page that provides a list of sources it learned from
Mm-hmm.
and the percentage of which it pulled from to create the thing,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that would be a step in the right direction
Mm-hmm.
because artists would be compensated, they would be alerted when their work is being used as a learning method, and most importantly, they can opt out of it if they so choose.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there's a way to move forward with it ethically, but due to greed and short-sightedness, obviously the companies don't want to do that. But it can't like it can be useful, but the way it's being used now is, it's kind of harmful. It's
Yeah.
convenient.
Yeah.
It's like, but the convenience of it cannot be understated.
Yeah.
But that convenience comes at a cost. So we
Yeah.
have to figure out a proper balancing act between the convenience and the cost.
Yeah. Absolutely. I absolutely agree. And like you said, they should realize that it's merely a tool.
Yes.
And nothing more. And maybe put it on a leash, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely agree there. And from your perspective, sorry for asking, may sound like a stupid question. Are you indie or traditionally published?
I'm a self-published indie author.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I don't know many major publishers who would publish a 740-page novel from a debut author. I thought about going the traditional route, but the more I wrote the story, the more I realized they would want me to cut more. And the way the story is written, if I cut out one chapter, then I have to cut out so many other chapters, and then the entire story would change. Characters would have to be dropped, and these characters, they all play a role in the end in some shape or form. And I just didn't want to do the whole balancing act. So I figured I would just publish it the way I wanted it. It would be out there exactly the way as I intended.
Yeah.
And if it succeeded or if it failed, at least it succeeded or failed the way I wanted it to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And plus, there's just more freedom in indie publishing. I'm working on book 2 right now, but obviously I don't have, my agent breathing down my neck asking, "Hey, I need a first draft within 90 days." I'm like, I'm still outlining.
Yeah.
So I can work at my own pace, which I think in the long term will be good because the second book won't feel rushed. I can really take my time and develop the characters, and also gives more people time to actually read the book and really absorb the world. Because at 740 pages, it's going to take people quite a while to really get through it, which is to my advantage because I can just use that time to really take my time with book 2.
True.
So yeah, I would definitely say I am a proud indie author.
Oh, congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
You don't have your fans not breathing down your neck either, so
Not yet.
not yet. They're still reading. And this whole process, I mean, self-publishing or indie publishing, did you expect what happened there, or did you come prepared, or not at all?
I think I prepared as much as I could in terms of writing. What I was not prepared I was not prepared for everything that came after the writing.
Okay.
Because, as an author, you think, okay, I just need to edit it once or twice and it's ready to publish. It's like, no, you have to do developmental editing. And then you have to do another round of developmental editing. And then you have to do line editing. And then you have to do proofreading. And then you have to do cover design. And then you have to do layout. And then you have to do another round of proofreading. And then you have to print it. And then you have to distribute it.
Yep.
And not only do all these things cost require a major financial investment, it's also a major investment in time and energy. And you have to have a great deal of endurance, because I think I went through like 3 or 4 full developmental edits. And incidentally, within each edit, they all said, "Hey, this character feels very underdeveloped. Could you add more about them?" Or, "This idea wasn't really explored as much. Could you expand on that?" So after 4 rounds of editing, I realized, wait, you're asking me to add more to the story, not less. Because at that point, the book was about 300, almost 400 pages.
Yeah.
And so then I asked them, "Are you sure you want me to add more?" And then all four of my developmental editors said, "Yes, the story would benefit from more depth and more time with these characters." I was like, "Okay, that is what we will do."
Well,
And so it became 740 pages, but then that meant you had to line edit all of it, and you had
yeah.
to catch all of your minor proofreading mistakes, and then you had to lay everything out. And it was just, I think it was, I think I finished writing in 2028 or no, 2018, but it wasn't until maybe 2021 that I was even close to finishing the whole editing process.
Yeah, understandable. And was there ever the advice from the editors to make parts of the first book because, attention span and so on of readers?
Yeah, someone suggested that I just make this one book into three separate
Yeah,
books, or make it into a part one, part two, and part
yeah.
three. But as I was I do have a version on my computer where it is split into three parts. But I realize in the fantasy community, people don't mind long books as long as it's good.
Yeah.
I feel like if you can make it at least through the first 3 or 4 chapters, then I believe that you'll be invested enough to keep reading.
Yeah.
And honestly, it just works better as an epic as opposed to a series of 3 books, each with major cliffhangers. Because I wanted to just come to a natural conclusion, and then book 2 comes out, picks up right where that one left off. So I didn't want to fragment the story, I guess is what I'm saying. I just wanted a firm beginning, middle, and end for the first book, a firm beginning, middle, and end for the second book, and so on and so forth.
A lot of work and a lot of thought that has to go in as a indie author. And you haven't even touched the question of marketing.
Yeah. Marketing is its own thing. I mean, fortunately, I majored in mass communications in college, so I was somewhat familiar with marketing. But the thing is, marketing in and of itself is constantly changing. So right when I was in college studying, that was when Twitter came out. So all of my mass media teachers were like, everyone has to get a Twitter account and try to understand this thing, and try to understand how to make it work for marketing, journalism, etc. Now, at that point, I was still struggling with Facebook. So I didn't really jump onto Twitter as early as I should have. But yeah, for book marketing, you have to have your finger on everything, really. I only recently created a TikTok, for example, about last year, when it became very, very clear that a good portion of the readership is on TikTok. So I had to really give myself a crash course into TikTok. My page is growing somewhat, but I had to not only break down all my content into 30 seconds or less, but I also had to make other content outside of, hey, sell my book. I had to interact with other creators just to, build each other up. I have to constantly be aware. I don't want to say constantly, but I have to be aware enough of trends that I can incorporate them into my content. And it is quite it's another investment in time, honestly, to the point where by the time I get my TikTok posts up, I have my Instagram posts up, and I have my Facebook posts up. After all that, I'm like, I still have to write today? I don't feel like doing that.
Yeah, but rest assured also the traditionally published authors have to do more marketing these days than they had to do in the past. So
yeah, because there's never compare books to movies or TV shows. When there's a movie coming out, there's all these commercials for it. There's this
Yeah.
whole marketing campaign for the movie or the
Yeah.
TV show. You see it on billboards, you see it on
Yeah.
buses, you see it everywhere. And books usually don't get that luxury. But
Mhm.
I think I've seen like maybe one or two book commercials for books on TVs,
Mhm.
and they were all for Stephen King novels, for example. So unless you're at the Stephen King level of being an author, you're not going to get the TV
Yeah.
commercial. So we're all very much out here on our own, just like it's
Yeah.
pretty much all of us just doing it on our own. Because even when you have a traditional publisher, they don't really market it for you as
Yep.
much as they used to.
Yep.
So you still have to do it on your own, which is both a good thing and a challenging thing.
Yep.
Because you're ideally you're getting genuine interest and the
Yeah.
book spreads via word of mouth.
Yeah.
But word of
True.
mouth is really hard to measure. Word of mouth, it's very hard to tell how well your book is doing if it's just through word of mouth.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, absolutely. And given your experience now as a writer and
Mhm.
as an indie author, what would be your advice for any other indie author?
Believe in your story, believe in your product, because you are your book's strongest advocate. So no matter what it is you're writing, if it's fantasy, if it's spicy romance, paranormal romance, historical fiction, general fiction, poetry, whatever it is, you as a creator have to believe in it. Because if you don't believe in it, if you can't get excited about it, how can you expect other people to get excited about it? And you're gonna face a great deal of uncertainty because the market's always changing. Like what 10, 15 years ago, TikTok didn't exist, and now all of a sudden everyone's on TikTok. But now with the TikTok ban being passed here in
Yeah.
America, all the authors are trying to figure out, okay, where else can we go to
Yeah.
market our books? So that it's this constant change. It's always in flux.
Yeah.
But the one constant is the passion you have for your story, the need you have to tell your story. That is what you need to latch onto. And once you latch onto that, no matter what happens around you, you have that to focus on.
Mm.
So even if all the authors migrate to some other app for their readership, even if all of social media gets shut down tomorrow, as long as you have that need, that passion for your book, you will find other people who share that passion. And within that shared passion, you will build a book community, and more people will come out and buy your book, basically. So believe in your story, believe in your product would be my bit of advice.
Wonderful advice. And you said you are currently writing book number 2?
Yes.
Okay. And how many are planned in this series?
The main series right now, it is 3
Okay.
so far.
Mhm.
These things tend to expand more and more, but right now it is 3 in the
Mhm.
main story with several spin-offs that
Mhm.
take place in various points in the world's history.
Yeah.
Right now I'm working on a short story that takes place maybe 200 or 300 years before the first book happens.
Mhm.
And I'm working on another spin-off story that takes place even further back than that book.
Okay.
And then I'm also looking ahead as to what happens after the main story is concluded. So, three books in the main story with a great deal of spin-off material.
Oh boy, that's a lot of work.
Yep. And I'm trying to get into historical fiction and
Ooh.
sci-fi.
Ooh, tell me more.
Historical fiction, I really wanted to do the story about a Black American Union soldier
Mhm. Mhm.
who survived the Civil War, and he's trying to reunite with his family. So
Mhm.
he's traveling through the American South during the
Mhm.
Reconstruction.
Mhm.
So he's looking for his family, and he's also reuniting other families who were
Mhm.
separated during the Atlantic slave trade. So he
Mhm.
runs into a lot of adversity as he
Mm-hmm.
tries to recreate this family connection.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one story idea I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is a sci-fi story, short story, in which a corporation sends out a recall order for a piece of software, and then the story follows three people who are heavily affected by this recall order, and the various ways they use the technology and how the recall order is going to be affecting them. And there's at least one more story about a guy who finds out his father was a spy, and then he has unfinished business. So all of that comes to his doorstep. So all kinds of stories going on here.
And they have to get out of from here onto the paper.
Yeah, because I like to tell people all the time, with all the voices I'm hearing, I can either write them down or have a psychotic episode. Which
Yeah, yeah. And they won't leave you alone.
No, they really don't.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Omari, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
Just if you are a writer, just like I said, believe in your story. Always keep writing. Don't give up, no matter what. Storytelling is an important aspect of human nature. We love to share stories with each other, so always hold on to that. And if you're a reader, and if you're looking for epic fantasy that's set in a West African setting that is filled with dark-skinned people, then the Colonial Legacy is definitely for you, and also requested at your local library.
How splendid. Wonderful. Omari, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for your patience despite all our trouble with the technology.
No problem. This was really fun. I'm glad to be on.
It was wonderful to have you on. You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.